Good morning, mortgage world, real estate world. It is Todd coming at you on our terrific Tuesday morning Coffee with Todd. We have a distinguished guest with us today, Mr. David Stevens. You may know David from all the incredible work he's done over the years with the MBA, being past president and CEO. He is a true street fighter, grew up as a loan originator, spent about 16, 17 years doing that, became the group vice president of that business with World Savings, went on to several other mortgage companies, got his CMB designation, I think in 2015. And Dave has decided to join us today to just kind of talk about the business and talk about the industry and kind of see what's going on. So Dave, good to have you with us this morning. Thanks for joining.
Good to be with you, Todd.
Yeah. I don't know what just happened, but your camera froze a little bit. There you go. Moving around. So guys, you can go ahead and post any questions you'd like in the live feed over here under comments. And, I thought I'd start off with a kind of interesting question, Dave. You've retired from the MBA and you did some really, really great work there. Bring us up to speed with what you've been doing since then.
Well, as everybody who knows me keeps telling me, I flunked retirement. Maybe I should have kept working. Once I left, I joined a corporate board, Dynex, which is a real estate investment trust, NYSE listed, an agency REIT, as we call it. So I've been on that board, but really over the last year or so, I had a few companies reach out and say, hey, would you come join my board or be an advisor? Or can I hire you as a consultant? And it got to the point where my accountant said, you better start a company. So I formed a company called Mountain Lake Consulting. I live on a lake with a mountain surrounding it. And I looked out the window. That's my creativity about as far as it goes. So yeah, I've got a consulting business. I do some long-term contracts. I do some really short-term contracts. I just did one this week for United Arab Emirates, who's looking to invest in property in the U.S. And we've done several phone calls with each other, and I'm helping them think about markets in the United States on the single family side. Really interesting dialogue, by the way, because the group that took me on is connected to the royal family, and they're looking to literally buy up a ton of real estate in this country just because of demographics. They think it's got nowhere to go but up. So anyway, a lot of interesting kind of work that comes your way when you're doing this kind of thing.
Well, I think, the Dave Stevens I know would flunk retirement almost immediately. You're a passionate guy, and you add a ton of value, and you're committed to making a difference. I do have two posts already. One has recommended that you, it says Dave Stevens for president. So, retirement might bring you all the way back, and somebody wants you to run for president. And then another guy just said, Cliff said from cross country, I feel like I should have a blue shirt on.
Yeah, we both commented, Cliff, on the blue shirt.
It's a team uniform. So let's divide this into three sections. Let's talk about first some of the things that you are like most proud of that you have orchestrated as the senior leader of the Mortgage Bankers Association. Things that come to mind that created an indelible change for this industry that you feel like, I feel proud that we were able to do that. What's on your mind? What's your short list on that?
I'm sure anybody who's been in that seat looks at their term with their own lens, and I'm going to do the same. But, when I came in, I had been in the Obama administration, and I'd worked on housing issues, and my own perspective was I didn't think the MBA had a voice that was very influential. In fact, having worked on the housing team for the president, when people at Treasury or in the White House or at HUD or OMB or whatever wanted to understand what's going on with industry, they would typically call lenders, specific ones, and usually the big ones, which, as you know, doesn't reflect our industry very well all the time. They're critically important, but it's a very distributed business. And I really wanted to set an impression that the MBA was the voice of the industry, one voice. You may recall that slogan we rolled out. And to do that, you really have to unite both bank and non-bank and try to find uniformity of issue. I remember when I first took the job, at the time, the CEO of Wells Fargo Home Mortgage was Mike Hyde. And Mike called me and he goes, Dave, I've been hearing you talk a lot about needs for the IMBs, independent mortgage bankers. My view was that the SAFE Act was unfair. and I still believe that's the case. It required testing for non-bank employees, but gave bank employees a freebie. And I thought that actually didn't do a great job in elevating the reputation of our business, because we couldn't say everybody's passed this test.
Right.
And it was also created all these other boundaries, which you're well aware of. Mike called me and said, when you decide to advocate on something, how are you going to decide what position to take? And I said, immediately, I'm going to take the position that's best for the industry. We're not going to pick sides. If it helps the industry overall and keep the playing field level, that's what we're going to fight for. But as I saw membership grow when I was there, I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that people began to see the NBA in a favorable light. And we had a good team. I brought in guys like Pete Mills, and I brought in Marcia Davies, and folks that are really having an influence there. So that's one. The other thing, which is in the background, NBA was broke when I came in. I brought in Marcia immediately, and because we had worked together at Freddie Mac, and I brought her into HUD to help me, but we looked at our payroll. We weren't going to be able to make payroll on month 3. Most of the employees may know that now. They didn't know that then. And today,
Wow.
today the NBA has never been more successful financially. And I actually just received a couple of contacts from board members saying, I always wondered why you had such a large nest egg. Now I understand, because they're canceling conferences, and there's really very little revenue coming in. So. But really, I think it's the unity of voice. I could add, we started the Open Doors Foundation, and it's really important.
That's cool.
To give back. And that's a nonprofit that's grown across the country. It's now pretty darn large.
Yeah.
And does very well. And of course, Marcia brought Empower to the table. That was all, of course, her doing, but it's a reflection, I think, on the NBA about diversity and the importance and power of women in our industry. None of that couldn't be any more important than right now, as we speak about what's going on in this country.
Yeah. Amen. Well, I know 2 things happen to me every time I see something come out from the NBA, and there's a lot. I'm very reminded of how active they have become under your leadership, and how much more value they're adding to the industry as a result of that. And so I think of you all the time, because I just see a really alive organization that really cares about mortgage professionals. And the other thing that I think is interesting is that as you look at social cause, and as we look at anybody, whether it's an LO that donates a percentage of, something legally that they can to a veterans fund or something like this, or wholesale companies that just do stuff for industry. When you have social contribution, you outperform most of the organizations that don't have social contribution. So there's a real pulse there that I know that you created. And I think it's just substantial to see what's happening. So good. So those are 3 good things. When you look as a consultant now, so you've got this mammoth 30-year history, right? You started off as a loan rep, and you rose all the way up to, to divisional and senior executive leadership, and then head of the MBA. When you kind of zoom away for a second, you just look at where are we right now in June of 2020. The good, the bad, and the ugly. What are you thinking about right now? And what are your clients talking to you about? And what concerns do you have, or thoughts about the next, let's call it 12 to 36 months, as much as Dave Stevens has a crystal ball?
Yeah. Well, I really depend on data. So the companies I advise, I will get their organizations together, their sales force together. One case, I meet with one company I consult for every Thursday afternoon, and I will literally share the most recent data that comes out of top economists, whether it's Frank Notaf at CoreLogic, or Mark Zandi with Moody's, Mike Fratantoni from the MBA, on and on. I will reach out to them and ask them for their view. I just am doing that this week, today, looking at what may happen ahead, and aggregating analytics that will help us think about what's going to happen next. So literally, Moody's and a few other economists had put together a forecast almost at the very beginning of this, late March, that said, Q2 was going to be terrible, but Q3 we were going to see a resurgence and probably gain back about half the jobs that were lost. And I presented that data way back then, and everybody was like, well, that doesn't sound right, because we were just in the beginning. The nation had just shut down in the middle of March under executive order, and states were shut down, and people thought this was going to be very long lasting. Well, it turns out data matters, and it helps. So as I think about the business that we're in, one is how do you keep people positive and focused on what's happening now? Because we are benefiting from the Federal Reserve intervention that's been driving rates lower, and all the subsidies that come out of the CARES Act. And the reality is that we're all beginning to realize is the CARES Act hit society very differently. If you're a service employee, high concentration of rental housing, you were hurt far worse than owner-occupied housing and white-collar workers. And there's racial barriers there. There's barriers along gender lines that show unemployment rates that are very disparate depending on who you are and where you work in the market. For our business, Todd, and this is relevant to you, I think, in what you do, we're a very short-sighted business. So today, everybody's pipelines are full. My companies have their ops teams working over the weekends just to underwrite as many loans as possible because they're so backlogged with volume. That's all temporary to me. We're going to have a resurgence of COVID. I think that's we're seeing it now. When that happens, I'm going to depend on forecasters to at least help me think about that. And then on the back end of this, we're going to have extended unemployment and other things that are hitting the markets. And so, and we're going to lose refinances because once we're done refinancing everybody wherever this bottoms out, maybe in the high twos, we'll be done. And if you look at the MBA's forecast or Freddie or Fannie, all of them call for sort of an end to the refi business. I think MBA is the most conservative, but moving really to a purchase-weighted business like we just had over the last year. And so from that standpoint, loan reps are going to have to perhaps resharpen their tools if they didn't have them sharpened already, or get them sharper to be able to deal with this transition from an order-taking refi business to a proactive selling environment where you have to become that individual that referral partner thinks of first and foremost when they've got their next potential buyer. And that's a big transition. That's a skill set change. And I think about, so now it's make hay while the sun shines. The virus poses risk in terms of, when are we going to get a vaccine and what's the recurrence going to do to state employment numbers we actually saw this morning. And then taking that out further, how's our industry, who are going to be the survivors of our industry coming out of all this, who can deal in a very different environment because refis will be done. The Fed will start raising rates 2 or 3 years out, and we're going to be back 100% dependent or majority dependent on purchase activity, going to require, a complete retooling of how our business operates.
Yeah, I reflect back on, as you were talking, reflect back on a couple of years ago when I was at MBA headquarters and you and I sat down and we were talking about technology, we were talking about trust, we were talking about relationships. And I'm reminded right now, as you talk about the inevitable, you can bet on it every time when refis go away, most LOs are standing naked and it's like, what do I do now? Right. And, the thought I had is with this technology, you're on the East Coast, I'm on the West Coast, we're able to have, for the most part, just a legitimate kind of dialogue. I can look into your eyes, you can look into my eyes. It certainly wasn't like we were sitting next to each other at the MBA when we were doing our interview, but yeah. I'm telling LOs today that the time to really try to buoy up your purchase business is like before the world says it's time to get your purchase business going again. And exactly. I'd like to encourage loan reps that understand this, and any LO that is new to the industry and you think this is like how it always is going to be with full pipelines, it's not. You can right now develop the daily discipline of reaching out to the partners that are going to be purchase partners, and you can do some weekly updates with them. You can do a 15-minute Zoom call with every real estate agent that you want to be partnered with in 2021, and you can start laying the groundwork for that right now. And I think that the idea is real success is when you plan for the inevitable, not react when the inevitable happens. And that's kind of my advice. Do you see it the same way?
Oh my God, yes. When I worked for World Savings, and we were, as you know, we had to sell an awkward product. So we, the head of the company, not Herb and Marion Sandler, but Jim Judd, who actually ran the business. Jim had come from Xerox, and so we went old classic professional selling skills, PSS, Taught
PSS.
everybody how to do. We went around with these flip charts, and this is old school, which some people have to be old enough to remember what that looked like. Although Deb Steele, who runs Pulte Mortgage, says, I always remember you coming in with those silly easels. That was us. But the thing that I was always taught by my executives early on in my career at World was always worry most when things are at their best, because you get lazy. And to your point, Zoom, Zoom just went public about a year and a half ago. Today, it's worth $50 billion. Its value exceeds the 7 domestic airlines of this country combined in market cap. And that's a phenomenon of today, obviously enveloped in COVID and what we're learning. But to that point, Todd, I mean, you're a professional sales trainer and more, but those of us who grew up in actual sales, face-to-face contact selling, pre-internet, when you can add your face to the dialogue and not just a voice or an email, you improve your chances of success significantly more so. I'm actually shocked that every LO hasn't spent the money, not for the free 45-minute version of Zoom, but doesn't have a paid subscription to Zoom, which is cheap, and hosting, as you said, targeted calls to build relationships with trust, to use the terminology that you express, in a manner that's going to help you set yourself up for success over the long term. And it comes back to my view. I guarantee you a lot of folks who are going to listen to this are saying, yeah, I've got to do that. I'm going to do that. And, there's too many gonna do's in this world.
Someday I'll do that.
When I was a rep, I was the number 4 top producer in my company my very first year. I mean, there was a lot of old tenure around me. People who'd been really successful in the past. They just weren't as hungry. And they had call reluctance and didn't want to go out and make individual face-to-face realtor calls. And I just figured, I want to go out and get rejected as much as I possibly can every day, because I knew eventually I'd get a sale. And it was competitive. It's a different spirit, but there's an attitudinal aspect to this, but there's how you manage your time in a quality way to achieve success. And I think from your point that you just made, long-term success is going to come from the kind of things that kind of example, which is, doing a Zoom call or X number of Zoom calls every day with targeted potential future prospects, i.e. relationships.
It is super important, guys, that you hear what Dave just said. And, our iPhone and Droid technology allow us to connect on demand, to be in demand to those partners. And we need to be thinking about what the inevitable is. I mean, Dave, you and I have been in this business 30 years. We've seen these interest rate cycles, and we've seen the desert, right? The desert after refis are gone, and nothing wrong with taking advantage of it. But guys, get into the discipline. It's this idea of compounding. It's this idea of do something a little bit every single day. Like if you just checked in with one realtor a day, every business day for the next 1 month, you can make an impact on 20 people's lives and start to set the stage that this is going to happen. And the other thing too is to develop routine. So Dave brings up this idea of time management, and I am passionate about the art of managing the time that has been gifted to you. And so you could right now, as a result of this dialogue, just decide that here's the days, here's the hour, and here's what I'm going to do. And it's going to be every day like brushing my teeth. It's going to be that discipline. I remember as
and it's funny if you force that effort. And one of the things that you teach us, I've never actually sat through one of your programs, but I'm sure you teach it, is that people will find an excuse to avoid the risk of conflict, of confrontation. I got to do this, so I got to do that, I got to return this email, I'll get to that. If you don't set the discipline to make those, I'll just use old school verbiage, prospecting calls during those hours of the day, and you don't block it on your calendar and commit to it, you're going to find every reason in the world not to do it. I screwed up today, I'll do it tomorrow. I mean, that kind of stuff just is all the recipe for disaster or for success, depending on how you do it.
And what's to your point too, and I love this because the MBA is always about helping people get better, learning, growing, getting better. Steve Jacobson always talks about that's what our people have to do. They have to learn, they have to grow, and they have to get better. The idea that I would have all of you understand right now is the simple idea that if you're not connecting, you're not converting. It's straight up. It's that simple, right? And so not only with borrowers where it feels like a layup, doing refis right now, but in the more sophisticated purchase market and in the spirit of trying to understand what does the future of our business look like with borrowers and building your tribe and so on and so forth, you've got to get good at a skill, or you will have all kinds of reasons why you don't do the thing. In this case, making calls. And so this idea of competence first, and then that yields confidence. And when you have confidence, then you're more consistent. And I think every successful person on the planet, whether leadership, sales, whatever they do, one thing they finally learn is consistency is the mother lode. If I do the same thing the right way, right?
Yeah, as situational leadership teaches you, it's competence and confidence are the two measures that you look at. And oftentimes if you lack confidence, it's a competence issue. And that requires training and development, because you're not going to walk in immediately being able to be able to present ideas in a way that motivates someone to pick you next all the time. It's a skill you develop. I'll give you one example, Todd. So I went, as you know, I was running a big real estate company, Long and Foster. We had a mortgage company, the whole 9 yards, and 14,000 agents. And I got a call to go in the administration, and I walked in and I found success pretty early on. In fact, behind me is a piece of legislation that the White House, the president signed, and the pen's in the frame for a bill that we helped get through with only 4 no votes. And people would come to me, have you done this before? And to me, I don't care if you're selling ideas to politicians or bureaucrats in Washington, or trying to recruit members into an MBA, or selling a loan to a prospect who you just got to talk to today. The skills are entirely the same. And so, it's all about showing them where the value is. And then I hate to say it, there's always a close involved, whether I'm closing for commitment to an idea, which I had to do in Washington over the last decade, or I'm closing to something more tangible, which is taking this loan today, or giving me the time to talk to you today, which is closing for time, a strategy, and selling. It's all the same kind of skill set. So trust me, if you learn this, it's not just about going to Todd's program, whoever. There are a lot of good people who do this. It's about what that's going to help you with your career, future management job, leadership job, moving up in your company, being a better manager yourself, recruiting top talent, teaching them. All of it is these are tangible skill sets that you actually use throughout your life.
Yeah, it's interesting because we're getting prepped today after we're done having this interview with you. We have a live stream, a 4-hour live stream tomorrow to about 3,000 mortgage brokers in Canada. And the opening line is the opening line is if you want to have the better you get at business, the better business gets for you. That's the line. The better you get at business, the better business gets for you. And I think people need to understand that our life is about skill sharpening. I tell the story that when I was learning how to fly private planes, I was horrible at landing. Just horrible. And it's like the one thing you have to do. You have to be able to land, right? And I remember coming home one day and my wife looked at me and she said, "You did not have a good day flying." And I said, "I feel like such a failure." And she looked at me and she said, "You teach that failure is okay. I need to remind you of that as your wife, that every time you mess up a landing, you're figuring out how not to land." And pretty soon, so it took 62 landings before I got signed off on being competent, but 62 times trying to get that plane to just touch down perfectly. And if I had given up on the third time, I wouldn't be a pilot. It's that simple. So it's interesting. What are you telling leaders today? So you've done a lot of great stuff just now on the loan side and equipping LOs to really be future thinking right now. What are you talking and what are you seeing about what leaders are doing today? The good, the bad, and the ugly.
Well, let's just talk about our mortgage business, because I talk to a lot of folks in the business. And by the way, I advise companies formally. There's several who have approached me and asked me to hire me as a consultant, and I can't take on more work right now, or I'm being very selective, but I still talk to them all the time and see what they're doing. To me, good leaders need to direct their organizations to do exactly some of the things we're talking about. And so, in some cases, I've been attending some recent calls with large groups of realtors and home builders organized by the leadership of the mortgage company. And I think that's just sort of building what we're talking about. And they'll have me do a presentation, or I did one the other day with Barry Habib, and I shared the video. But these are ways that you actually help provide the leadership and set the example and help make sure the thing gets organized in order to get the sales force moving forward. I see a lot of executives doing very little, who are sort of sitting in their offices, worried about capital markets and operations support only, and not thinking about how to roll up their sleeves and help their organization get prepared for what's ahead. And frankly, as you and I have seen, sometimes it's the largest mortgage companies that are least effective at leading, and then they get caught in the next downturn with all this overhead. And in many cases, we've seen them collapse under their own weight. This is a time when you need to be, very effective, and you need to be able to, spend your time obviously focused on operations and capital markets, but you need to be thinking about your organization, because that's where the business comes in, and the symbiotic relationship of sales and ops, processors, underwriters, trying to get some unity of thought in terms of everybody understanding what everybody's doing and why they're doing it, and then driving activities. My view at the end of the day is, I'll give you my easy example, Todd, which I used to use as a sales trainer and a manager myself, and trying to teach other people how to manage. You don't tell your employee, you don't set objectives and just give them a laundry list of objectives. You don't tell someone just to go build the Statue of Liberty. It doesn't work that way. And maybe you get workers and say, hey, see these rocks over here? Can you bring them over to that island? Let's get victories one step at a time. And when they get that, reward them. There's role play involved in terms of learning. There's time management. There's feedback skills that have to come to managers. And I'm seeing different executives engage in different ways. And unfortunately, for the most part, I don't see the level of engagement necessary. You talked about Steve Jacobson at Fairway. Every day he sends his team out, an incredible dialogue of motivational words, then builds it around the company, whatever the need of the day is. Very transparent, very open. And I told him, I said, man, you must love doing that. And he said, no, I don't really love doing it, but I have to do it.
Right.
So we're, again, introverted, traditional executive type managers exist throughout our business, and they get just as lazy, bad word, as salespeople could get when you're in a volume period like we are now. You get used to the volume. You're working remote from your vacation house or wherever you are. A lot of the CEOs are today. Many are coming to the office, many are not. And I don't know if they're thinking about, what's coming next, and how do I start preparing my sales force while not losing the business that's coming in today, and preparing my organization, frankly, because it needs everybody on board to be able to address what's going to be a much more competitive market as we look into late 21 and 22.
Yeah, I was on a webcast yesterday with John Maxwell, and he was interviewing Casey Crawford from Movement, and it was just, It was really powerful to just listen to Casey's ideas as how to lead effectively and how to create a culture of purpose. And, every mortgage company, including them, have had ups and downs over the last 2 or 3 years, especially if we think back to how hard Q1 of last year was and the end of 2018. But I really admired just the idea that culture doesn't happen in a day. It happens daily. And as soon as I'm done with this interview, I'm putting my T-shirt on, and my T-shirt says "Culture Matters." And I think that every leader today has to take a look at what is your culture and how are you leading. And one of the things that John Maxwell always talks about is, followership is an earned right. If you demand followership, people are going to only follow you because of threat and fear. But if you earn followership because of the impact you've made, the dent that you've made in your corporate universe, the value you've added to individual lives, then people will follow you to the end of the earth. And I think that is the decisive thing that every leader has to understand. What are you doing every day to sharpen your leadership skills? So I agree with you. I have a question that I want to take you to, and then I've got one more. What are you seeing on the real estate side? What any trends or I know that some of the big boys like Redfin and Zillow, they've lots of layoffs and things like that, and iBuyers have kind of dried up. They're going to come back. But what's your 3 minutes or 4 minutes on the real estate industry right now?
The Zillow concept is a vision, right? And whether it's going to achieve it, whether their CEO will achieve that vision, I think is yet to be determined. I see to your point about culture. Compass. I'll just give you one example. So the DC manager of the Compass office asked me to come talk to all our agents, and I didn't know that the CEO was ultimately going to reach out to me and say, "Can you do Compass now for me?" Because I've heard great things, and he opened up the call. Very dynamic real estate company, I think. Now, I don't know anything about the rest of their skill sets other than young, aggressive, and growing. Is kind of how I view that company. I don't want to name drop other companies, but it's interesting when you do these calls, and I've done a bunch with real estate companies. Have a level of overall leadership being applied. So I think that's one dynamic that affects real estate. Technology and skills and age are going to be critical components of this real estate industry going forward, because, as you know, the average age of a realtor is X in my range, and the future of the real estate market is not going to be like that. The future home buyer is going to be much more electronically focused. My kids who are millennials, they'll text me, they won't email me. We've used these examples before. They prefer to do everything online if they could. And so from that standpoint, I do think we're going to see this transition over to a more automated environment. I think the greatest threatened species could ultimately be the loan officer if they can't find a way to add value beyond quoting a rate and a fee, because it could be a heavily commoditized business. And I know that's blasphemy for many out there. And every time I do this, someone says, we'll always have the loan officer, a need for them. I think you'll have the need for people who create value and can help people with their problems. But you're going to have the Quickens of the world going IPO and growing, believing that can also be done through a central platform in a more automated way. And at some point, I think that's going to transition. I think we're going to reach demographically a period where baby boomers are no longer the market, and millennials and Gen Z are the next markets. Yeah. And that's what we're going to see in terms of, much more dependency on expediency, efficiency, and less of a need for human intervention. And when that happens, Todd, that's I know you're fighting against that path, because this is all about adding value. But I think we're going to come down to those that have an ability to add a unique value that requires their involvement in the process. And then we're going to have others who believe that they can reduce overhead costs and sales force expense and do it all and deliver it electronically in terms of that experience. And I think there'll be a room for both. But I do think that the ones who survive in the human touch world are going to, going back to that skill set standpoint, are going to need to be able to bring value to the table to justify their living. So movement to more technology, movement to a younger demographic, and the companies that can do that more effectively, I think, are going to be the ones that are survivors.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was in Kalamazoo before COVID hit, and I was working with AmeriFirst and doing their AmeriWrap rally. And the theme that they had for their rally was the most human company wins. And the book was called Marketing Rebellion. It was written by a guy, and that was the subtitle of the book. And I'm, as I look at technology and as I look at what you just commented on, I still am going to hold out to a belief that in the transactions that matter most, the size, dollar amount, risk, and all of that, that the human advice, the human touch, I don't see a Watson, I don't see a Google, being able to completely automate a knowledge base for consumers, especially first-time home buyers. But I do think the LO of the world needs to understand empathy and humanity and understand how technology is going to come alongside that and speed the transaction, which means you've got to speed the trust simultaneously as you speed the technology. Otherwise, you're not going to be needed. And this points back to what we talked about at the front end of the interview, that as easily as it would be for anybody to take our conversation and start talking to a real estate agent every day or a builder, it is equally as important for them to continue to talk to the clients that are in their tribe that they know they need to add value to, instead of just going and looking for, new and more business. And so we're super focused on what is your value proposition and how learned are you? And you look at what America suffers at, from a stress standpoint, forgetting everything we've currently gone through for the last 90 days, about 80% of Americans suffer from financial stress. And so when you add mortgage to financial stress, the obvious place of value is become a fiscally literate LO that can advise beyond the transaction. And then you got them. You got them. And nobody's going to fight anybody that can help them win financially, I don't think. So that's kind of my 2 cents.
That's good.
Yeah. All right. Last question. What is the biggest lesson you have learned in your career?
I'm a big believer that if in your career to, be able to look back someday and say, man, I had great success. It's not just about money. It's about taking risks and learning new things. So, I had been at World for many years. I'd started as a loan rep, ended up as group senior vice president, was on my way to maybe run the whole company, which is what the president of the company wanted me to do. And a recruiter calls me to go to Freddie Mac. And I went to Freddie not for the money. I had to move back east. I was living in the Bay Area where World was headquartered. I went back to Freddie because I wanted to learn the secondary market, capital markets, and how that operated. And no one could teach me that without me being inside that building.
Yeah.
And so, I made those career moves to be able to get the broadest view of our industry as possible. I always had this idea that I was going to someday run my own company. That time didn't work out for that. But, that brought me to Long & Foster to run a huge real estate firm with mortgage companies. And at the time, the largest privately held real estate company in America. Again, another foundational move for me. Didn't pay me more for the job at the time. I didn't make these moves for money all the time, but I did make it for development. And then I get a call from the administration when President Obama comes in asking me to take a massive pay cut and go into work for this administration. With only guarantee was I had to completely sever ties with Long & Foster and with the agreement that I would never go back there. So, you go into these jobs, you have no idea what's going to come next. You're subsidizing your own living, et cetera. But why? It was the most amazing time in my view, in terms of a credit crisis that we had ever lived through. And I wanted to be able to learn that. So it's a series. Everybody goes through these steps. Everybody gets forks in the road so that they get to look at. Just don't be comfortable where you are. Always think about how you can achieve the next level. Even if that means you're going to remain a loan originator your entire career, which, by the way, was my favorite job ever. And still remains to this day. In fact, I thought about becoming an LO here at my lake, but it's a long story why I'm not. But anyway, so this is all about making sure you're constantly learning, have an insatiable appetite to do better, even in your job. A loan officer, getting a CMB means that you've learned a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Teach yourself, learn the business, find mentors who can teach you, not just about selling, about how capital markets work, financials, the human spirit, read books. These are the things that you do to improve yourself. So I don't know that my lesson learned was always take risks in your career and don't make decisions based on money. And that's how I sort of followed my life. It worked out well either way, but that's how I ended up in sort of the variety of unique experiences that I had.
Yeah, this whole idea of risk taking, there's that you look at what is risk, and risk is risk, and there's a lot of people that don't understand by not taking calculated risks, you're actually creating more risk. Yeah. And so everybody that achieves a level of success has a different risk tolerance than those who don't. And so just step by step, try to increase your risk tolerance and your ability to bear risk, right? Without being stupid and without betting the farm and so on and so forth. Although sometimes we have to do that. We have to bet the company on an idea, right? And many of the best capitalized companies in the market cap companies in the world bet the company on an idea. So,
but that tells you why you always have to test things too.
Right.
If you come up with a great idea that you think is going to make your company successful, don't change the whole company at first. My view has always been, test it, try it in a channel or an area of the country or an area of your business, see if it works, measure it. If it does work, double down. If it doesn't, you can always retrench and try again.
It's like the pet food company that took their top 3 dog food selling brands, decided if those 3 were the top 3, let's combine all 3 into one new brand. They combined all 3 into one new brand, and it failed miserably because the dogs didn't like it.
Yeah. Well, Coke thought they could change what was it? I forgot what they changed, and
Right.
about
Hey, man, great hanging with you. I know that we're going to be blessed in September with you participating at Sales Mastery. We're sure grateful for the friendship and relationship. Continued success to you, and thanks for pouring into our tribe and making a difference today, Dave.
You bet, Todd. Good.
Okay. See ya.